Good afternoon, people of Schaumburg High School. I'm Ashwin.
And I'm Fahil. Welcome to the 1 o'clock news.
Recently, we interviewed the man on the hot seat, our President Barack Obama.
The reason we requested to see President Obama was to discuss the current state of the economy.
As the year ends, we've seen our economy grow, but let's see what our president has to say.
Let's get right into it. All right, Mr. President, welcome to Schaumburg Money Watch with Fahil and Ashwin.
Thanks for having me.
Pleasure to meet you, sir.
Likewise.
So we called you to talk about the economy. Let's begin with our GDP. Currently, our GDP is at 17 trillion. How do you feel about your time as a president in relationship with GDP?
I'm glad you asked about that. So currently, our GDP is higher than it was 4 years ago. However, economists like Jeff Cox have given an argument that our growth rate just isn't high enough. However, that's just really incorrect. We've had substantial growth in our GDP over the 4 past years.
Do you think only a 1.1% GDP growth rate is high enough?
I understand the argument that our GDP isn't large enough. However, we've grown. Our GDP growth rate isn't all that large, but I believe we've had some substantial economic growth.
Our growth rate has actually been falling for the past 2 years. What's your response to the argument that you haven't just done enough?
I agree that our GDP isn't in the best spot. It has been falling. However, we are on a small but steady incline, and that's been happening in the last quarter of 2016. Our GDP is in the place that we need it to be to facilitate the economic growth that we've been seeing.
Let's talk about our GDP per capita. Do you think each American makes enough money annually?
I absolutely do. For the past about 4 years, our GDP per capita has actually been on the incline. This is because each American's income is generally higher. This is due to the economic growth we've seen during my term of presidency.
Lastly, let's talk about our real GDP. It has been growing by about 2% for the past couple of years. How do you feel about the annual growth rate?
First, let's define our key term of real GDP. Real GDP is measured with a fixed dollar. This means we can measure our growth from year to year. This means that we are truly growing because the real GDP has been increasing because it considers our inflation rate.
Now, to a quick word from our sponsors.
Hello, my name Prem Jyotish and I will be your astrologer numerologer today. Astrology and numerology combine to create very accurate chart reading. The zodiac sign is the future to destiny. If you have problems with money, finance, economics, love, homecoming date, call me today. Thank you.
Welcome back to Schaumburg Money Watch. Mr. President, you last mentioned your inflation rate. How do you feel about our current rate of inflation?
So our current inflation rate has actually been falling. However, I'd like to take the opinion of an economist in New York, namely Carl Gilbert. Essentially, our growth isn't the best, I'll be frank, but it isn't the worst thing in the world. Apply that same logic to our inflation rate. It's on a very steady incline, however, our inflation rate isn't very high right now. We're in a good spot to grow as an economy.
Speaking of inflation, let's talk about another indicator that starts with the same letter, interest. Our interest rate currently is only 0.5%. Do you think larger companies are actually benefiting from this rate?
Interest actually has to do with both the consumer and the business. This means our interest rate shouldn't be too high as to hurt our consumers, but should be high enough to help our companies. That's why our interest rate is only 0.5%. I do think that the rate actually does help companies, but it also doesn't hurt the consumers.
Speaking of consumers, let's talk about our Consumer Price Index, or the CPI. Our CPI has been on the incline during your term as president. How do you feel about that effect to government, businesses, and consumers?
For government and businesses, an increasing CPI is actually very good. It allows for a steady national domestic growth rate that we've seen during my term. However, an increasing CPI can act detrimentally towards our consumers. That's why the CPI isn't too high as to not hurt the consumer's financial states.
Lastly, for our show, let's talk about the bare and bones, money. Our money supply has been increasing over the past couple of years. How do you think the rate has affected our economy as a whole?
Well, our M2 money supply includes paper and coin money like dollars and change, checking accounts, demand deposits, and other high liquid assets. If this value is increasing, that means we definitely have more consumer income being managed by companies. Thus, consumers and businesses have benefited from the growth of our money supply. Therefore, our economy has grown from the growth of our M2 money supply. because both consumers and businesses are benefiting.
All right, that's all the time we have today. Thanks for coming in, Mr. President, and thanks for watching Schaumburg Saxons. Tune in for tomorrow for a brand new guest. See ya.
Alright guys, they're based in 2 hours. I don't know what the hell I'm doing. Help me out, come on!
Boss, talk about the wall.
What are you talking about? GDP per capita is increasing, GDP's increasing, everything's increasing.
Screw the predictions, I don't need those. Screw the numbers. What about the what? Skittles?
Immigrants, they're poisonous.
Why are you comparing Skittles to people?
No, racism's okay. Skittles, what else? What else?
Mexicans.
Mexicans?
Why are you so racist? In 2017, according to Trading Economics, CPI is going to increase GDP per capita, inflation, interest rates, and I think you could do better economically than Obama.
I don't care if money supply is increasing. I don't care if CPI is increasing. Let's go with racism, alright boys? Let's go.